What's up, guys, and welcome back to Bass Fishing Tips. And in today's video we're going to be talking about the drop shot. Now normally I'd hold up a drop shot right now and I'd show a drop shot off, but I actually don't have one rigged up, and that's because I'm going to show you guys actually how I rig my drop shot, because the way I rig my drop shot up is a little bit different than I've ever seen anybody else do it outside of saltwater fishing and live bait fishing. And so it's something I think for me helps me to get a few more bites, and it's something I want to share with you guys. And then I'm going to give you guys 3 tips for fishing the drop shot this time of year that'll help you go out there and to catch a few more fish. And so without any further ado, let's get right into today's video. Let's start rigging up the drop shot. So the first thing that you need to know is the knot that I use. Now, I've heard this called a loop knot. I've heard this called a chicken rig. I've heard this called a dropper loop. I've heard it called a billion different things. And like I said, I picked it up first from the saltwater world, and then again applied it in the live bait fishing world. And between those two things, kind of settled on that I like rigging a drop shot this way. Number one, because it's really simple and it's really fast, but then number two, it's a little something different, like I said, than they might have seen before. And so what you gotta do is you gotta take your main line or your leader line here that you got. You wanna pull out about 1 foot of it, and you want to make a little loop just like that right there. Now, depending on how much of a tag you've got here is really going to determine how much of a the distance between your hook and your weight on your drop shot. And so kind of just vary where you need it. You could have a really short drop shot, you could have a really long drop shot. For me, I normally start with about 1 foot of a tag on my drop shot, and then I can cut it down as I need it. But you're going to make a little loop just like that right there with your line. You're going to grab both sides of the loop. You're going to grab your tag and your main line, and you're going to open up one side of that line. So normally what I do is I'll take essentially whatever line is laying on top, which is normally that main line. I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to start taking that and I'm going to twist it around that bottom piece 3 to 4 times. Just like that, you're going to create the loop, you're going to have the twist, and then you're going to have your bottom piece with your top piece. Now it's a little complicated, so if you need to, please pause the video, rewind. It's kind of the best part about video. Then you're going to take the bottom part of that loop, you're going to stick it back up through the loop that you created just like that. And right here, what I normally like to do is I like to take this piece, put it in my mouth, because it makes tying this knot a heck of a lot easier. You're going to bite that piece, keep tension on it, and then you're going to start pulling both pieces of your line together. And just like that, you created a little loop in your line. And that is what effectively is known as a dropper loop or a chicken rig or all the other different variations that I've heard it called over the years. Now, what's really, really cool about this little loop that you just created, number one, you've got your tag hanging down below it. So this is where you're actually going to connect your weight. And then number two, this gives a little separation away from the main line. It's going to give your bait just a tiny bit more action. And well, not a tiny bit, actually quite a bit more action, and then just kind of separates this whole package away from each other, which I think is really interesting because again, it gives the drop shot a look that is just a little bit different than every other drop shot. Now, one thing that's important with your little loop that you created here is you make sure you don't want to get it twisted over itself, because then your hook isn't going to want to sit up straight. So make sure that loop is opened up the way that it needs to. Then all you're going to do is simply pinch that line just like that. You're going to take your pinch line and you want to make sure and you want to run that loop with the hook point of your hook sticking up towards your rod tip. So what does that mean? That the hook point needs to be opposite to the direction that the weight is going. So your weight's going to be hanging down this way. You want that hook point pointing up that way. You're going to take that little loop. You're going to stick it through the eye of your hook. You're going to take the whole entire loop, pass your hook through it, and then just pull it back tight, and that creates effectively what is known as the chicken rig or the dropper loop or all the different variations, and that is what I use for a drop shot. And it's really, really cool. Like I said, it's just a little something different, really nothing revolutionary, nothing crazy, but it's definitely just a little something different, a little bit of a different take on the drop shot, and you're going to show those fish just a little something different. Then you want to connect your weight, so you're going to take your tag in here, the one that's hanging down below the hook. I like to use these little pinch style weights. So as you guys can see there, it's just got that little metal piece on the end, and that's actually, you just pinch your line in there. So you're going to run your line through the open portion at the bottom, and then you're just going to pull it up in there. It's going to pinch that line up in there, and then you have a fully rigged up, ready to rock and roll drop shot, except for obviously we got to put our bait on there, which leads me into tip number 1, and that's how I choose the correct bait for this time of year. So obviously we are in late fall, early winter. Depending on where you're at in the country, you're probably already into the kind of winter phase of fishing. And you know, this time of year, I really start switching up my colors, especially when I'm throwing plastics and jigs or anything that I'm dragging on the bottom, and anytime I'm really trying to trick a fish into eating something. You know, because for me, there's 2 principal reactions that a fish has to something. Either it's going to react to it, meaning it's normally moving fast, that you're going to hit a part of their brain that literally makes them do something that even if they didn't want to do it, they can't help but lash out at something. That's that reaction bite. Crankbaits, jerkbaits, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, more reactionary. And then you have bites where you're going to trick a bass into biting something, and that's something like a jig or a drop shot or a shaky head, where that bass is going to swim down to that. It's going to be able to examine it really, really well, and then it makes a decision whether it wants to eat it or not. So this time of year, one thing that we'll all notice is, number 1, the water tends to get clear, depending on where you're at in the country. It could be true, could be not, but it tends to get clear. And then bait fish and bass themselves and everything else starts to get just a more opaque color to it. And a lot of that has to do with sunlight exposure and a bunch of different things. And so one of the things that I do this time of year is I throw essentially the same exact bait that I always throw in a drop shot. I just adjust the colors ever so slightly. So one of my favorite things to throw in a drop shot is probably one of the most famous drop shot baits of all time, and that is the Berkley Power Bait Max Scent Flatworm. Now, I absolutely love a flatworm. I got a bunch laying here in the boat, and I actually pulled out 2 of my favorite colors, but I want to talk about both and kind of why I choose one over the other. So as you guys can see here, this is another version of the flatworm. This one is called Gobiashi. It's got some red, orange, purple, black flake in there. It's got a little bit of flash. And realistically, this will work in cold water. I've caught fish on it in cold water. But something that I've noticed this time of year, as everything kind of starts to get a little bit more opaque, they start to lose that color, that going to more muted, flat colors can really help me to get a few more bites. And so this is actually Smelt. And as you guys can see here, this is essentially a just very flat, plain sort of color. There's a little bit of blue flake in there, but so little that it's hard to notice. And if anything, it's got more of a blue iridescence than it actually does a flash or a flake. And as you guys can see, it's just a very muted, you know, monotone kind of grayish brown with that off-white to kind of tan color. And I love this color this time of year because it oftentimes does a really, really good job of mimicking the bait fish and the bluegills and the other small things that bass start to eat this time of year, and really kind of what we want to mimic when we're throwing a drop shot. And so I really love throwing the same bait that I'm always going to throw, which is probably going to be the flatworm in a lot of instances, and or the flat-nosed minnow, but I want to make sure that I'm throwing it in a more opaque, kind of just passive, very muted color, because it tends to, this time of year, get a few more bites. Now, tip number 2 has everything to do with actually fishing the drop shot itself. And there's one thing about a drop shot that I absolutely love. It's kind of like a Carolina rig in the fact that it really lets you know what's going on the bottom. And I think it's something that a lot of anglers look over, and especially if you're a new angler, or if you're a bank angler, or really any angler at all, but especially the bank angler, is because the drop shot is very sensitive, because you're dragging it along the bottom, you're going to be able to detect bottom changes very, very well. And I think that that's huge this time of year, because a lot of the times bass are going to use those transition points between, you know, chunk rock to gravel, mud to sand, sand to gravel, any transition between 2 different bottom types. They're going to use that, and they're going to use that area just to kind of set up on. It's something that a bass does. They're very visual animals, very visual predators, and anytime you have a change in bottom composition, bass are going to want to hang out around it, especially as they start to move offshore a little bit more, and or just go try to access some deeper water as water temperatures start to fall. And so being able to detect that bottom change and that bottom difference with your drop shot is going to be huge. And so the tip really relies on you as the angler, being an active angler. Make sure you're noticing when the bottom changes. Am I going from sand to gravel? Am I going from gravel to bigger chunk rock or even boulders? Those types of transitions and those areas are going to be the perfect place that bass are going to set up, where they're going to want to live and where you're probably going to get most of your bites. Which leads me into tip number 3, which is when you get to those transitions, what are you going to do? Well, there's really 2 things that I love to do when I kind of pull into an area and when I start to feel that bottom transition, or whether I know that bottom transition is there or not, or even if I pull it up to a brush pile or a lay down or something like that. Number 1 is going to be kind of what I call the slack, pull out your slack and shake. And so essentially what I mean by that is I like to pull my slack out of my drop shot, and I like to not drag it towards me. I don't like to reel up any of that slack. I don't want that bait moving towards me. I simply want to have a taut line, and I just want to sit there and I just want to shake that drop shot. Really make that little flat nose minnow shake on your drop shot and really put out a lot of vibrations into the water without moving that bait very far at all. And when you're using that little dropper loop, like I said, it's going to give that bait quite a bit more action, and you're just going to get that little bait to sit out there and to shimmy and to really get a bass's attention. Because like I said earlier in the video, we're trying to trick these bass into biting. They're not reacting to this bait. They are really determining whether they want to eat it or not. And so when you sit there and you really shake that bait and you make that thing move, a lot of the times it's number 1, you're going to get a bass's attention. It's going to draw a bass into the area if it's in that area. And then once it's kind of sitting there shaking in its face, as you guys have seen in probably thousands of videos with bait fish, live bait, artificial, when that thing's moving around and twitching, it kind of starts to hit all the little categories that it needs to hit for a bass for them to be able to want to bite it. And so just kind of pulling the slack out of that line and just shaking that taut line, not moving that bait at all, or if as little as you possibly can, while shaking that bait in between those transitions, can be a great way to get a bite. Another way is to do the dead stick. I love dead sticking a drop shot, especially as the water starts to cool down, as we start to get into colder water, or anytime we have a big weather change, you know, like a big front moves through or something like that. When bass seem to get really, really grumpy, dead sticking any bait can be a great way to get a bite. But dead sticking a drop shot is one of the best ways to get a bite. And what I'll do is simply, as I'm pulling it into a transition or as I'm pulling along, I'll do exactly what I do with the other retrieve, which is that little shake. I'll pull all the slack out of that line. I'll keep that line taut. I'll just let that bait sit there. Maybe every now and again, give it a small twist just to kind of activate that bait, and then just let it sit there. Now, these max scent baits, they have quite a bit of salt in them. They've got a lot of scent in them and a lot of different things. And so they're naturally going to sink. And so just like with a wacky rig or something like that, the magic of that bait is in the fact that it just slowly sinks through the water column. Now, these little flat-nosed minnows are designed to not fall as quickly, and that's kind of the magic of the smaller bait, as well as that flat bottom design on that bait, is it just creates a little bit of resistance for that bait to actually stay up. And so when I pull that thing into a dead stick, I'll let it sit there. Normally that little flatworm is just going to slowly shimmy down. Again, another reason why that dropper loop's really, really cool, because of that separation. That bait can be up here, and then it can slowly fall down, and then when you pulse it slightly, that bait's going to straighten back out and then slowly fall again. And that slow falling action does a really good job of looking like a dime bait fish, dime bluegill, something like that, that a bass wants to eat. It's going to entice those bass to want to bite. And it's just, again, one of my favorite ways to get them to bite, especially when we're dealing like with big transitions between one weather pattern to the next, big front moving through, when bass just tend to get grumpy. But that is that's my drop shot setup, using the little dropper loop, using those more muted color baits, really being an active angler and watching what's going on, with the bottom and trying to feel what's going on, and then really activating those 2 different retrieves can help you guys to get a few more bites. And if you guys enjoyed this video, click this video, it's popping up right here.